Because we share. Because we share.
Hi, I'm Tom Conley from Pinnacle Consulting Group, and welcome to the Bit Bucket. It's been a great share. This is how we usually wrap things up. This is kind of our odds and sods and little tiny snippets that we couldn't fit into another major presentation. This is the Bit Bucket x'31. And for those of you who might have been paying attention, you're wondering, how come we had 2F in Pittsburgh and now it's 3-1? It turns out that we missed one along the way, and we duplicated a number. So this is our RCF. We're trying to get back to where we should have been, but we kind of blew our X30 anniversary. We missed it. So we apologize for that. Okay, today's speakers, Tom Conley, Ed Jaffe, Sam Knutson, and Skip Robinson. And my topic today is secure socket to me. We all heard from Phil, who did our security keynote and also our penetration presentations earlier this week, and we all found out that the mainframe is not nearly as secure as we all thought it was. So what I'm going to talk about is how to set up SSL for TN3270 really quickly. It takes about 10 minutes. But the bottom line here is, don't assume that your internal network is friendly. It's not. There could be all kinds of sniffers out there. Any Linux has Wireshark. You could have users sniffing your own packet traffic, trying to find passwords in the clear. So what you want to do is you want to encrypt your internal network traffic so that the passwords aren't in the clear. And your most robust implementation is going to use something like IPsec or ATTLS, but that takes a lot of time to set up. What we're going to give you is something with TN3270. You can encrypt it, enabling SSL, and it'll take about 10 minutes. And it basically, it's not going to completely secure everything, but TN3270 is a significant user of traffic, and each one of your really power users are going to be using TN3270 somewhere along the way. So again, it takes about 10 minutes. Tom Brennan Software has a couple of blogs, and one shows how to create the key database with a self-signed cert. There are steps missing because the Gus Keyman utility changes from release to release, but we'll show you the new steps here. He also has one on how to create a RACF keyring using a self-signed certificate. And there was a person earlier this week that told me that many companies have their own certificate authorities. So if your company has a CA, you could probably sign the certificate with your company CA. But we're going to use the self-signed cert because it at least gets you encrypted quickly, and then you can upgrade to your CA cert later, either your company's or you can pay for a third-party CA cert. Okay, so basically I go into OMVS, and I'm going to run the GSK Keyman utility, and I get a database menu, and I'm going to create option 1, create new database. So you get a bunch of line mode prompts. I just kind of aggregated them here, but basically I'm going to enter the key database name. I called it pinnacle.kdb because that's my company. I entered the database password. It was nice enough not to print it out, and I re-entered it. And then I didn't select a password expiration, and I selected the default record length. I just hit enter for both of those, and then I didn't want a FIPS database, so I just hit 0 to continue there. And it created the key database. And again, it was pointed out to me in a previous session that IBM user was probably not the best place to put it. That's just for an example. You obviously want to put it in a real location, not something that's auto-mounted like I have on my system. So after that, you hit enter and you get the key management menu. So we're going to go down to option 6 here, and we're going to create a self-signed cert. So we do option 6, and again, I aggregated the responses. Up here is the CA certificate, so we're going to select option 1. Then I'm going to select the RSA method, option 1, and I'm going to select the 4096-bit key. Go big or go home, right? Then we also, we have to do the signature digest. So again, I went big with the SHA-512. And then down here, we have select the digest type, enter the label. I called it pinnacle.cert. There's no common name. And then I filled in all the required stuff here, but you can also fill in like your city and state, the country, region. My company name was required, Pinnacle Consulting Group. So I hit one down, down here, you can do some alternate names or you press 0. You press 0 and it says please wait. On my system it took about 2 minutes, but after that it created the key database and the certificate was created. So basically after that, now how do I enable the certificate? I go into my TN3270 PalmLive member and I specify a secure port, and then I say the key ring is an HFS file, and then I put in the key database name. Sorry about the laser, it's not working. But down here I specify SSL v2, and then I recycle my TN3270 server because obey file typically doesn't work. And then I get my TN3270 SSL client, and that's it. I'm SSL, and basically in the amount of time I took to talk to you, it's done. So at least then I'm up and running, and then I can go further with more secure certificates.
Anyway, this is what I call hardware management heaven. In my job, I actually, one of the things I like about it is I get to see what other customers are doing. And sometimes I get good ideas, sometimes not such good ideas. And you know, sometimes we see dumps, of course. We're working on things. Anyway, we had a situation recently where we actually got a look at their HMC. We were helping them configure something. I think it might have been an LPAR capacity group. But anyway, and they had the old original HMC. It looked just like it was OS2 running on the original 9672 RX1. And you guys remember I mentioned that particular machine in the program opening on Monday. We had one of those. We had an R11, later on an R21. And it was interesting because I hadn't seen that in a long, long time. And so we were talking to them about this, and I guess this is one of those, you know, things they don't really get into very often. They hardly ever touch their HMC. Mostly they let IBM do everything. And so they were actually unaware that there were other cooler, better ways to operate your HMC. And so that just reminded me of a presentation here in the Bitbucket that I had done back in Atlanta called View from the Topo. And I was talking about this topology of view capability that existed in the HMC. And so I'm going to revisit that a little bit this time. I took a little bit more time here to take a really good look at it and go into it a little more than I did before. So it's not a repeat, but it is the same idea, and maybe it's timely. How many, are there people here, I'm just curious, still using the classic view? They call it the classic view on what? All right, there's still Mary Ann. So for those of you that are using the classic view, you're going, well, yeah, of course. It looks just like that, except the fonts are a little different than they were back in OS2 days. When they switched to Linux, I don't know, they needed some free fonts or something they didn't want to spend money on. I don't know what the deal was. They got these fonts. So anyway, the way this thing works is you have this, you know, task, this notion of a task area, and you can either rotate these little buttons at the bottom to loop into the one you want. So you have these little guys right there. You can loop through the choices. And originally there was only a few different categories of these things, so it wasn't too long. But after a while now, we've built up many different categories. So the other thing you could do to find what tasks you want is go into this task list, which of course replaces everything here. And then you figure out which group of tasks you want. You can open that up, which, you know, replaces again in here. Find the tasks you're interested in, put them over on that side, the task pane, and then go back over here and open up your groups again. Find the single object. You can select multiple objects or a whole group, whatever that you want to do. And then once you have that selection in place, you can either drag and drop, or you could double click on the task over on the right. Now, don't get me wrong, when this thing came out in 1994, it was like magic. You know, what we had before that was so bad in comparison that this thing was like really, really cool stuff. But, you know, that was 21 years ago and 13 hardware generations, as I mentioned on Monday, and other better technologies have emerged. So this is the thing called the HMC tree style. It is the only way that IBM basically works on our machine. When they come in, they don't even bother with anything else. And all of ours are set up to use this. And what's cool about the tree style is you never lose your context. When you select something like I talked about on the other one, you're always replacing. You know, you're getting a full screen and you're having to essentially remember where you are in a tree of things. Whereas on a tree view, everything is, you know, you're seeing the full context. Also, all the tasks are automatically being assigned for you. The correct list of things that you could do, actions that make sense for you, are all being in context changed depending on whatever it is you're doing in this thing. And I know that most of you are using this, so this is not new news. But it is, you know, that's what they call it, the tree style. And by the way, some configurations need this, right? I think you need it for ensemble management. There's some other things I think you need it for. So it really is the direction of things. And originally, our Top Gun told me they were going to phase out the other one, but they never did. Anyway, so when you have, here's an example of the tree style with the CPC selected. So I've got systems up here. I put a dot right there next to the CPC. We only have one, right? And then automatically all these task choices are customized for that right there. And what I like to do if I'm on this screen is press this little plus here that opens everything up so I can see all the choices rather than having to fight my way through a menu. One thing that a lot of people don't see is this little topology tab up there. Anybody seen or play with this topology tab? So if you go out to that topology tab and you click on that, you now get this other view, the topology view, which I view is very good for me because my eyesight is not what it used to be. And I happen to like big fonts. So that's one of the cool things about it is it has these big fonts. In our case, there's just the one system, right? If you have multiple systems that the HMC is managing, obviously you're going to see multiple icons in this view. And then at the top here, you know, I can click that to expand. Now within the topology view, there are different layouts, they call it. And right here you have the tree layout, the hierarchical layout, circular layout, uniform length layout, and grid layout. So you have choices for what you want to be able to do there. Here's what I get when I click that thing to expand it and see all, and in this case I'm using that original tree layout. Now that's a little confusing. I know we have the tree style. Now we're reusing a word. IBM never does that. They never reuse a word. They never reuse a three-letter acronym, TLA, right? Never. But you really don't have to worry about that because honestly, if you're just using the tree style and you get used to it, that's just your HMC. You're not even using the word tree anymore, so in this case you have a tree layout. And it's showing, in this case, all of our LPARs right here, you know, basically taking up the whole screen. Now the next one I have is the hierarchical layout. And you know, these things, it's just a personal preference, whichever looks best for you. And I would imagine that if you have lots of elements, that some of these views might work better than others, okay? So we just have, however many are here, 8 or whatever. But, you know, if you had 60 LPARs, then maybe there's a difference in how these things look. That's the circular one right there, which I think is kind of cool. And this is the uniform length, and the big difference between that and tree is just that the arrows are all the same length. And lastly, the grid layout. And I'm just showing one line here, but I did prove that if I squeeze my screen down, it does multiple rows. So, you know, if you had a lot, you'd see multiple. What you have are zoom controls. So over on the left, you have the ability to zoom in, zoom out, bring it out to full screen. Or on the right, to the right of that, there are cursor controls. This one here is the select mode for the cursor. The middle one is pan mode. So if you're in pan mode, you can move the image around with your cursor. And this last one is like zoom cursor mode, where you take the cursor and you can draw a square on your picture and it'll zoom up that square. Okay? So this shows what it looks like zoomed in. And then also for any one choice, any one object on there, you also can right click on it and zoom to it or center it. So you can move the picture all around. So there's also this notion of a overview, and there's a control for that. You can turn it on and off. And when you have the overview, and I probably shouldn't have used the grid because it's kind of the least interesting looking one, but I was just going in order. But wherever you are on the map here, and then whatever your little selection is there, right? This is like an inset on a map, right? You get a map of Seattle, it shows the whole area, but maybe the downtown area has an inset and it's larger. So that's what you have there, is this inset. And so you could see where you are in the map, and therefore you can move this around and have it make sense. You can also click over here in the overview and move your view around over there. So if you want to see different parts of your map, you can essentially move this big part around. Okay? So there I selected it, and when I did, I got my traditional little button over there on the right that allows me to pull up menus. And there's what a menu looks like. In this case, I've selected my favorite choice of all, the one that I tend to use more than any other thing, and that's IPL. Why do we IPL more than any other thing? Because we write software and sometimes we have problems. But anyway, so hopefully some people here found this interesting. We think it's cool stuff. I personally think it's neat, and wanted to share it with you today.
I have loved Seattle. I don't know about you guys, but this has been a fabulous conference, great energy, and I have gotten out of the hotel a few times. I took this picture down by the Space Needle, had some wonderful running weather here with the lack of rain. I think the folks in Seattle are appreciating that. And as I do, I always keep an eye out for, Z. And this is all about the Z, and that's why I've spent most of the week in the hotel, cramming about the latest and greatest developments on IBM Z systems, talking to customers, and sharing some things with y'all. So I did notice a few Z locos in Seattle, just doing a few loops around. This is Zipcar, right down the street here. There's a place that I went down and got my Starbucks coffee every morning and muffin. So I started thinking, well, why IBM Z systems? We just sort of reeled that off, and this has been since around 2000 that they kind of introduced that branding. We used to be 390, if you remember that. And so when we talk about our brand and our platform, it's really helpful to carry that message forward all the time. We kind of have to be our own marketeering department within our businesses, that we have to help promote the brand and what the key values are. And so a couple more Z's I notice. This is Zeke's Pizza. I really like this one, and I would like IBM to maybe take some notes here. I think there's opportunities to light the logo. I want to see a big lighted Z on the side of the next box. I think that'd be pretty cool, don't you? And then there's Club Z. I guess we're all in Club Z. But the Z in IBM Z systems stands for zero downtime. And I think that's worth remembering. All too often we just, look at it, as a sort of a meaningless label. But zero downtime. And that's well accepted, that the mainframe has the highest availability of any platform in the market. Even the competitors, can't really challenge that. This is fact-based. The mean time to failure of over 40 years, it really is all about the Z. So I'm going to keep looking for Z's wherever we go. And, we've seen Z Pizza. I found a few more here. I think there's a pretty good chance I'll find some more of them. So several times this week, I heard the phrase, have you uploaded your foils? Now, when's the last time you actually saw foils at a conference? It's been a while. I know some of you have seen foils. Some of you have created foils. So foils were those sort of, mylar plastic sheets, and you could write on them. And what was really fun is if you got them out of order or upside down or mirror imaged. Reordering foils is a lot harder than reordering punch cards correctly. You really had a nightmare if you dropped your foils right before you were going to present. You prayed they all came down in one nice stack. But they did have a very distinct style, and it even persisted after the actual foils were gone. And that was created within IBM by this Foils 5 program. And these things were scripted. And I actually used to write my status reports in DCF, so I kind of dug this. I was an advanced function print guy when I started in the 80s. But foil is, interestingly enough, is, I think, one of the original recursive terms that I heard from IBM, because it stood for, and I had to hunt around a little bit for this, foil over incandescent light. So foil means foils over incandescent light. Okay, that's recursive. It's, it's calling itself. But this does seem to be perhaps the first attempt at a recursive language. And I'm, for one, glad that we no longer have to have handouts and foils, and we've eliminated a lot of that baggage. And so hopefully the value, remains with all the great information without some of the unnecessary logistics. And this is an example from, I think it was about maybe, again, the 90s. This might have been, I think, from one of the MVS program openings. A very interesting APAR. I have the proceedings going back for 20 years, and still love. Occasionally, there's a session that's worth going back. You love to revisit some of this stuff. So this I tweeted this out, and I think this section of the pitch is sort of the tweet-esque version of our presentation. A lot of little things that by themselves are absolutely meaningless. In fact, maybe this whole section's meaningless, except this. If you haven't seen this on either the assembler list or IBM main, and IBM main in particular has a lot of noise. Sometimes you can miss things. Johnerman, really a legendary figure from IBM Silicon Valley Lab. Has the father of the assembler. So many innovations in high-level assembler. The incorporation of all the really cool Slack mods into the assembler. Fundamentally changed the way assembler development was done and productized some of the best ideas that came from customers over the years. He used to write these presentations for Share that were like books. I mean, and they were so beautiful. When we had handouts, these things would be as thick as your thumb. They would have color cardboard covers. I took them home like reference manuals. I had a nice little block of them on my shelf. So I do miss those, and it turns out all of them are nicely archived by IBM on this page. So all of his old presentations. This is useful stuff, and you should go grab these. Some of these are in the Share proceedings, but they're in one place. You can just pull down all the PDFs. So if you do assembler programming, I highly recommend these. They're great references. A lot of them are still quite relevant. Now here's the really fun news. He wrote a new one, and it's a whopper. Almost 1,300 pages. Can be used as a textbook. It has exercises, the solutions to the exercises in the back. It really takes you through the why and the how of modern assembler programming. And if you've been down to Barnes & Noble, there's not a lot of books coming out on assembler programming on the mainframe. So this is, I think, right now, probably the newest seminal work on assembler programming on modern IBM mainframes. And the price, it's free. You can just go grab the PDF from the IDCP site at Marist. They've got a really great education program up there. They've got a MOOC for some free education. This is a fantastic resource that if you are doing assembly programming or you are teaching it to one of your colleagues, you really want this. And I expect that this will, by virtue of where it's released, that it's going to be used in some formal training. This would be a great resource to leverage if you're doing in-house training. If you're an assembler programmer, I think you're just going to enjoy it and probably will learn something. I have never spent time reading anything from Johnerman or listening to him an hour and not learned something. And that's a Johnerman button. I was lucky enough to listen to Barry Merrill do his Button Man pitch again this week and kind of recount a little bit of the history of Share as told through buttons. And that was one that John actually appeared on. And there are some other assembler buttons. If you go out to Barry's site, mxg.com, you can take a look at the Button Man database, and it's even searchable, so you can find buttons in your particular area of interest. So in Pittsburgh, I talked about the MVT operating system, which really, OS 360, this is the one that kind of helped IBM rule the world of commercial programming. And it was freely available in source, and I talked a lot about the preservation of that and was able to share a copy with everyone on CD of the source code and even demonstrate with some screenshots having it running on a Mac or on a Windows PC. And so I thought, well, it would be appropriate maybe to step forward from MVT and talk a little bit about how you might run MVS on your machine of choice. Now, There was some discussion of Hercules as an emulator in some of the security-related talks this week, and it was being discussed in the context of running modern operating systems and using it as a platform to engineer exploits. That's not the context I'm going to talk about it in. What I'm going to point you to is sort of, I think, the purest historical use of an emulator, which is to look at materials that are otherwise inaccessible but that have really great academic value to preserve and to understand how things got to where they are. Because most people don't have the luxury of playing with a personal ZOS system, customizing it, looking at the source code. Hercules is a perfect platform for that kind of activity. It runs 370, 390, Z architecture, emulates all the appropriate devices you need to run an operating system, and it currently runs on Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. So it's got its own homepage. You can get the source code. You can get the latest and greatest builds. However, that's sort of leading-edge development activity of people who enjoy the mental challenge of implementing the latest and greatest instructions that IBM has provided in the real big iron might not be the best way to run the oldest operating systems. What you'd really like is, okay, so I'd like to see MVS 3.8 running on my PC as quickly as possible. How do I do that? That sounds pretty cool. I worked on it, or I worked on XA. I'd like to have my own system that I can just play with. That's what I'm going to give to you this morning. So Volker Bondeke, back in 2002, put together a turnkey distribution of MVS 3.8. And it had a couple evolutions. Turnkey number 3 was widely distributed here at Share on CD-ROM. Volker hasn't sort of updated that official distribution, but some other people have taken his works and done a little bit of derivative work to it. And again, this is all the original IBM source code and build for the MVS 3.8 operating system. So Jürgen Winkelmann has really put a lot of work into this. And he has built a system, and he admits that this is for his personal preference, that comes up unattended, operates, really just runs along nicely and gets you up and running on the system very quick and in and able to play around, assemble programs, use some of the old freely available languages, tinker in minutes. So I think this is probably the best starting place to take a look at what has been preserved from this era of computing. And his website's right there. You can go out and download it. You get the whole package, the current one. He's provided incremental updates if you downloaded it earlier. He includes a set of 4 disk packs, virtual disk packs for all the CBT tape content. It's a wonderful set of free software, almost all of it open source, and the source materials for the operating system. So you've got everything you need to really get MVS up and running. And you say, well, how long is that going to take me? Well, about 10 minutes on the hotel Wi-Fi, which is not the fastest Wi-Fi. So you just unzip the files into a directory, call it whatever you want, click on one bat file. So this is really 15 minutes, you're up and running. You need a TN3270 client, which you point to your machine. That's generally called localhost, is the name that your machine is always known by to itself. You could use the IP address. Port 3270, you could come from another machine if you're networked for that. And at this point, you're up and running. You have MVS 3.8 running on your Windows PC. Slightly different for Linux or Mac, but in principle the same. Now, I mentioned you had a user manual. This is a really nice user manual. And I know there's a temptation not to read the manual. And I'm feeding that temptation by telling you a user ID and password that you need to log on. But the manual is worth reading. It is so well written. He tells you how to customize it, how to turn off some of the automation that he's baked in, what's in there, how you might want to extend it. When it comes up and you connect that emulator to it the first time, you're going to see the logo, first time in. Hit reset, you'll get prompt to log on. Once you're logged in, it'll pop you into an environment that gives you access to some tools like Review, RFE, and IMON from Greg Price down in Australia that work wonderfully in this environment. And Greg makes some things that are commercial on Big Iron available for free in their MVS 3.8 forms. So you get a robust set of tools to play with. An ISPF-like kind of toolkit in RPF, so you can browse, edit, customize the system quite effectively. There's an HTTP console, which you're going to want to, again, take your web browser on your PC and point to in your local host at this port. And that gives you access to what's going on with Hercules, to be able to, the emulator itself that this is running within, make some changes. And for instance, if you wanted a console, because I know you all want your own console on your own machine, I'll pull that out of the manual too. It's one of the first things I wanted. How do I get to the console? You have to attach it. Again, we're in an emulated environment. You type that on that web console. You fire up a second 3270 emulator, and you need to have an LU name of CONS, C-O-N-S. I use Tom Brennan's Vista. Tom mentioned that in his segment. It's not free, but it's very nearly so. I think it's like $30. It's written by a former sysprog at SCE. Tom Brennan's a great guy. I just love his tool. And then you go and you put that command, including the slash, on the web console, and you have your own console. And it'll come up with a display area, and I'm sure some of you remember how to get rid of display areas. If not, you know, Control A, comma, you can find that in the manual as well.
I really covet this position in the Bitbucket. It's the last segment of the last session of Share, and I've been doing this for a while, and I really like being able to stand up here at this point. Sam mentioned being in a bookstore and not finding much in the way of books on assembler, but I think he did not notice the book called 50 Shades of Blue. There are several chapters in there on kinky things you could do in assembler. It's a different kind of how-to manual, I guess, but it's going to be a bestseller, I'm sure of that. Just the title alone is going to do it. So I have a few little pieces here that are 2.1 related, installation, early stuff. Would have liked to incorporate them into the user session earlier this week, so think of it as a sequel to the Tom and Jerry show. The first one is it's sort of long and drawn out because I tell it as a saga, as I experienced it, and the other two at the end are quite a bit shorter. Okay, I call this irreconciled differences for a reason, and you'll see when I get to the end. Not irreconcilable, because I do believe that they are truly reconcilable, but these differences were not reconciled, and in fact ended up with counseling sessions that still never really got past the problems. So we use NetView system automation in our shop. Not forever, we converted from another product, but for the last year or two, we depend completely on it, on automation. I think most shops these days that have automation really have a hard time getting along without it. Our operators who used to know how to issue commands and sequences of things now just, well, in fact, they don't even start anything. It comes up automatically at IPL. There's one prompt early on that says, how do you want us to bring the system up? And they just reply normal. And the next thing should be telling users that they can log on. So we use it for startup and shutdown. We use it for task restart in the case of Abend. And also message handling. Okay? That's one thing automation does. You use it to respond, for example, to WTORs. But you also can, if you have automation, you can take some other action. So you see message ABC, and that means it's time to start task XYZ. Okay, so you can do all this stuff in automation. And without automation, I don't think we could IPL a system. I don't think we could even shut down a system other than just vary XCF off. So I installed ZOS 2.1 from a server pack, and I IPL'd it on a sandbox system. That's our normal method of moving. It's one member of a two-member full-function parallel sysplex, which is very small. It gets very little usage, but it really has all the bells and whistles of any of our other production systems. We do that because we need to see early on that things are going to work okay. So like all of our sysplexes, everything is shared. Now I say everything, of course, you can't share page data sets and some oddball things like that by the nature of the technology, but other than that, everything in the environment is shared. Data sets, catalogs, the whole kit and caboodle. So we had been running R13 on this sysplex since our ESP days. We were an ESP customer for R13, so that goes back to several months before GA or whenever the heck that was, and it had been running R13 for that length of time. But now, having IPL this, we are running different levels. R13 on one side and 2.1 on the other. Again, that's standard operating procedure for an early rollout. Now, most everything came up fine on that first IPL. We had a couple little tweaks to make, but basically okay, except system automation. It simply did not work. We had all kinds of errors and failures, some add-ins, some weird messages, things that displays that level 2 wanted us to do didn't even work. But still, the other member of the Sysplex, using almost everything shared, was working just fine. And again, they used all the same files except 2 different sysreses, and everything that's on the sysres would be different. But other than that, they were sharing everything. So we opened an SR with IBM, and level 2 was mystified as to what was happening. They had not seen this before, it didn't make any sense to them. This R13 server pack, the older one, had come with NetView 6.1 and SA.3.3. That's just the timing of the order. Remember, early on, before GA, that's what was there. The 2.1 server pack came with NetView 6.2 and SA.3.4. So there was an upgrade to both of those products, but not what would appear to be a giant leap. So there was a lot of doc flowing back and forth. We're showing them this, and they're trying, it went on and on for a long time. And there were lots of suggestions, and we would try out their suggestions, and things were not working, including rebuilding the SA environment, lots of stuff. There was lots of frustration and delays. Now, this delay literally was months. Now, that's not the fault of level 2. I'm not blaming them for that. We had a serious availability problem of Mr. SA, who wasn't around for long periods of time. And rather than take control of it myself, I tried to let him do that. But I was also monitoring the SR to see what the heck was going on. So we were stuck. We were stuck on one member of the sandbox Sysplex for a long time, way long time. Eventually, somewhere along the line, somebody mentioned, somewhere in a doc, or I can't remember where it came from, the subsystem name table. Now, IEF SSN, the subsystem name table, defines the ZOS subsystems for IBM, for vendor products, and for any user-written subsystems that you might have. They all go essentially into one table, and at IPL time, all the subsystems get built way early on in the IPL, pretty much before any real tasks get started. And those include entries for both NetView, the network version of NetView, whatever you want to call that, and for SA. They have their own subsystem entries as well. Now, we try to avoid, and this is sort of a key to the way we run our shop, we try to avoid duplicating similar ParmLib members. What I found is over time, if you have 2 different members in ParmLib that are different only in a small way, that over time, somebody's going to make a mistake. Somebody's going to go into one and make a modification and forget that they need to go to the other one and make the same modification. And I'm guilty of that as well. I try to avoid that situation. So we try to have a completely shared member, ParmLib member, for all systems unless absolutely necessary otherwise. So in this case, we had 2 members for SSNT, a shared 00, which was in our off sysres ParmLib, and a member 01. And we concatenated them as 00 and 01 in IEA Sys. So the layout of 00 is the one that we had used traditionally for the most part. It started out with an entry for SMS at the top, an entry for JES2, a couple of entries for these IP things, which I have no idea why they're there, but they've been there for a long time. And then this keyword that I implemented after I came home from a share a while back called begin parallel. Begin parallel says that from this point on, all the subsystems that are named can be initialized in any order as they are available. Okay? In the old days, without this, it was all sequential. From top to bottom, they were all created in a thread. The last one would be last, and so on. But this begin parallel means at this point, you can start working on all of them. The early nucleus initialization program, whatever the thing is called, can do them all at once. And then a whole bunch of other entries for all sorts of other subsystems. SSO1 contained only the entries for NetView and SA and nothing else. Why? Okay, this is a hot button of mine. It stays hot. This button has never been allowed to cool off completely. It has to do with incompatible product changes. This happens every now and again where some products, somewhere, not necessarily, Core ZOS, but it has to be in ParmLib, and that product makes a change of some sort to a statement in ParmLib which is not accepted by previous versions. So you have to make this change, and you cannot share that statement with a previous version. In this case, NetView 6 had changed the SSN entry by adding the initialization routine statement. In version 5, that was not there, and in fact, you couldn't use it. Okay, so version 5 was never kick-started to say ignore this or whatever anyway. So if you tried to use this statement under version 5, it would fail. If you didn't have it under version 6, it would fail. So you were required, in order to get through this transition, to have two different statements. And the way I handled that was to create the separate member which lived on sysres. So this 01 guy with my NetView and SA was on sysres, and in our case for release 12, which was the older NetView, he would use that statement, and then the other sysres for version 13, for R13, would use the new one. And it seemed to work just fine. It worked fine for R12, it worked fine for R13. Okay, so sysres then for 2.1, I built it the same way. I mean, just kind of out of habit. So I created an 01 member on the R21 sysres, V2R1 sysres with those now same entries, okay, the same ones, because version 6.2 of NetView didn't change over 6.1. And I built it the same way, even though, and here's the key, even though the compatibility problem was long gone. Release 12 had been discarded along the way, long before this. So I no longer needed those separate statements, but just out of habit, I created the structure of the subsystem name table the same way. Well, that turned out to be the entire problem. Something I guess that level 2 had never seen before, couldn't conceive, because I was violating instructions that came with the version 6 NetView. That is, years earlier, a couple of years earlier, they had said, do such and such with your subsystem name entries. I had not done it that way, but I didn't notice because it always worked up until now. So it was not a NetView issue, not a NetView problem, or SA. I simply took the NetView entries and I put them in the original subsystem name table in front of begin parallel. Okay, so near the top, so that everything else that followed would have those subsystems already there. And the way these subsystems work is that when a command comes through, or a message or whatever, ZOS will pass it to each of the subsystems in turn to see who is interested in handling it. If it's a command, that subsystem will take care of it. If it's a message, that subsystem will do whatever it's going to do with it, and it always goes in order throughout the whole sequence. And if you get invalid command, when you type in your name, and it comes back invalid command, every subsystem has looked at that, and ZOS has looked at it, and they've all agreed that they don't know what to do with it, and only at that point does the systems come back and say invalid command. If any subsystem along the way grabs it and says, I've taken care of this, and they mark it as processed, then ZOS doesn't get excited about that. So in order to fix this problem, I just eliminated the 01 guy altogether. He was no longer necessary. Hadn't been ever since R13 had rolled out. And so after literally months of stagnation, this problem just went away with the few strokes of the edit. I was kind of embarrassed, let me tell you. And embarrassed and really kind of against the wall, because again, my SA guy's availability was very limited, and he had wasted all these cycles trying to solve a problem that was never his in the first place. So the conclusion of this, again, back to my hot button, is that incompatible parm changes are deadly. I started with several different words for deadly as I was writing this, and decided that for political correctness I would stick with that. So, okay, you can substitute any kind of insulting slang word for deadly, and you'll get the sense. The problem is the customer is forced to invent his own weird accommodations for this incompatible change. There is no standard way of doing this. There's no automatic. There's no simple mechanical process that you can invoke. You have to figure out, as the customer, how to get past this incompatibility. And clearly I chose something that it worked for a while, but having worked for such a long time, I completely forgot about it. And when it got to 2.1, and never occurred to me until way into this problem that that was the actual issue. And I conclude that I'm simply not smart enough to handle this kind of a change. And again, I appeal to IBM, whatever it takes, don't make the customer suffer this. Put some kind of an accommodation into a lower release to handle the new keyword. It doesn't happen real often, but when it does, it can be a real problem. Okay. In the process of installing 2.1, I've surprisingly got some assembly errors for JES 2. We normally just take our exit code for exit 6. We normally just simply take our exit code, we update the SMP information, the little wrapper for the right version, reassemble, and it just works. It's been a long time since we had to touch any of our exits. I think probably release 7, when JES 2 made so many changes, it's probably the last time we had any serious problem with our exits assembling. But here I got this assembly error. And it turns out when I dug around, and it wasn't obvious because there were no like flags around this, that there had some fields had been moved from this thing called $TE or $DCN into $CI work. And not, well, moved, but also renamed, okay? So at least JES 2 is good about that. When they make a change, even if it's a field size, which could be a real problem if you didn't realize, they do change the name of the field so you will know at assembly time that you have to make some accommodation. So I knew I needed to fix it, but it was a real head scratcher to try to figure out what was wrong. Now, some documentation and conversation suggested that this was done in support of batch modernization. Okay, that was the phrase. So in exit 6, we use these fields, which are described as I show here, an ACB for system message data set, and that's why that was so important. If you want to write a message out to the system message data set, you use a pointer to this to get to the routine that does that. And then there's a scheduling environment for the job. We use sort of in-house scheduling environment adaptation of what IBM supplies with keywords and all sorts of things. And then another one called the address of the CAT for the job. And so those 3 fields were no longer where they used to be, moved, and so their coding had to be changed in order to accommodate that. There were other fields as well that we didn't happen to use, but they all got moved to this $CI work field, control block. And those are the names of the new guys. And the point is that these control block changes hit you up front at assembly time, and it doesn't matter whether you're going to use batch modernization, whether you're going to implement that or any changes. That was the motivation, but it doesn't matter how you run JES, you're going to see these problems right up front. Now, since I ran into this problem back in, I don't know, summertime of 14, I guess, there's been effort on the behalf of JES 2 people, and Marna's gotten involved to try to publicize these changes. There were some just very cryptic comments that things had changed, but no description at that time of what had changed and how. So if you have exits, just be aware, particularly exit 6 seems to be vulnerable to this. And I think particularly because of that ACB guy, if you want to write messages to your job log or your, I guess the job log part, anyway, you need that pointer to that routine, which is out there somewhere. So regardless of how you intend to actually run JES, you are likely to run into this problem, or may run into this problem. Okay, Robo Logo. In vanilla ISPF, I believe, well, we haven't run a vanilla ISPF for so long, I can't remember, but I think it's standard that you get this logo display when you first come in to ISPF, when you first enter. And you can see from the bottom, they call it a logo, but it's really a copyright notice, and I guess that's important for some companies to have this. It was never important for us, and we never displayed it. But when I brought up ISPF under 2.1, I couldn't suppress it. It just showed up every single time. Now, we modify the primary option panel heavily. I don't recommend that, but it's kind of a tradition. And the code that we put in to modify it was essentially the same code. It's been very constant over many releases. We just go in and tweak a little bit of thing here and there, but basically those lines work the same way. We've not had a problem like this in forever, I guess. And I tried all kinds of things, but essentially every time it re-entered ISPF, including a start. If you did a start new panel, I would get this logo again. It's like, what's this crazy? So I talked about this on IBM Main. I put the question out, how do you people handle this logo? And I got various suggestions from various people. And somebody who I'm sorry to say I can't remember now suggested this modification at the end to comment out 2 lines, which we had never needed to comment out before. But once we commented those lines out, then the logo stopped displaying, and everything was kind of back to normal. So if you don't modify the panel and you don't care about the logo, then it probably doesn't matter, but this is what we had to do in order to make that work. Okay, that's all I have. Got some acknowledgments for people who have helped. It's supposed to say, see you in Orlando, because that is the main message of this whole end of the Bit Bucket, is that we hope you will all come back, you will join us again, and 6 months from now, more or less, we'll have another Bit Bucket session, which will at the end say, see you in San Antonio.
'Cause we share